The Rideau Center was the kind of place that sorted people without saying a word. You could feel it the moment the automatic doors slid open. The cool, conditioned air that smelled faintly of department store perfume and buffed marble. The way sound moved differently here, muffled and deliberate, like even the echoes had been curated. The upper levels gleamed. The atrium let in light in long, clean columns. People moved through it with a particular ease, the ease of people who belonged. Through the East Service entrance, the one without the fountain and the potted trees, came Dennis Hartwell, 41 years old. Pipe fitter, by trade, 12 years with a commercial contractor out of Canada. He wore a gray Henley, work jeans that were clean, but still carried the ghost of a crease at the knee, and a pair of boots he'd run a cloth over that morning. His daughter, Sophie, was 6. She walked beside him with both hands wrapped around his right forearm, her chin tipped up at everything. The hanging light fixtures, the glass railings, the escalators moving in opposite directions, like something from a dream. He had not planned to be here on a Saturday afternoon. The original plan had been the park on Hogsback Road, where Sophie had a favorite swing she called the going to space swing, because of the angle it made when you pushed it high enough. But it had rained hard since morning. One of those Ottawa October rains that came sideways and didn't apologize. And Sophie had looked out the window for a long moment, and then looked up at Dennis and said nothing at all, which was somehow worse than if she'd complained. So they were here. Sophie had asked for nothing in particular. She just wanted to be somewhere that wasn't their apartment. And Dennis understood that more than he could say. They had been at the Rideau Center for about 20 minutes. Sophie had pressed her face against the window of a toy store without going in. Dennis had bought her a small hot chocolate from a cafe kiosk that cost more than it had any right to. When Dennis saw the woman on the bench, she was sitting near the base of the escalators on the main floor, in one of the resting areas that the mall had placed along the corridor, with the kind of reluctant generosity that commercial spaces sometimes offered. The bench was a steel-framed thing with wooden slats, and she was perched at one end of it, very upright, with a canvas bag on the floor between her feet. The bag was navy blue, and had been mended along the left strap with a strip of iron-on fabric that didn't quite match. She wore a beige wool coat, well-kept but thin at the elbows, and her white hair was pinned neatly. She was looking at the middle distance the way a person looks when they are trying to take up as little space as possible. Dennis noticed her, the way you notice something that is very still among moving things. Sophie noticed her too. She slowed for a moment, tugging gently on Dennis's arm. He patted her hand and they kept walking toward the directory near the food court. Sophie wanted to know if the mall had a bookstore. They had not gone 30 feet when Dennis heard the voice. "Ma'am." Flat, brisk, carrying. He turned without deciding to. There were 2 mall security officers. The one who had spoken was younger, late 20s, with a lanyard heavy with a radio and a keycard. He was standing directly in front of the woman on the bench. The second officer, broader and slightly behind, had his arms crossed and his gaze moving over the corridor, like a man performing surveillance rather than actually watching anything. The woman on the bench looked up. Her expression did not shift into alarm. It was the expression of a person who had been through this before and was already marshalling themselves. "Ma'am, this seating area is for shoppers who are actively using the mall." She said something in reply. Dennis was too far away to hear it. "Going to have to ask you to move along," the officer said. Sophie's grip on Dennis's arm tightened by a fraction. The woman reached into her coat pocket and produced a small piece of folded paper. She held it toward the officer. He did not take it. He kept his hands at his sides and said something else, shifting forward by a degree that was barely perceptible, but absolutely unmistakable. Sophie looked up at Dennis. "Daddy," she said quietly. "Why is he doing that?" Dennis watched the officer reach toward the woman's elbow. He had not planned to do anything. That is the truest version of it. He had told himself on the walk over that the reason he was turning around was that Sophie's hot chocolate to throw the cup. He had told himself that. But the cup was already in a waste bin they'd passed. and he was walking back toward the bench with Sophie's hand still folded in his, and by the time he had arrived at any conscious decision, he was already there. "Excuse me," Dennis said. The officer turned. Up close, his name tag read T. Gutting. "Can I help you, sir?" It was not a question. "I was just wondering what's going on," Dennis said. His voice came out level, which surprised him. "Sir, this is a private matter between mall security and—" She was offering him something, Sophie said. Both officers looked at Sophie. Sophie looked back at them without flinching, because she was 6, and had not yet learned that children were supposed to be deferential to uniforms. "A piece of paper," Sophie added. She was showing him something and he didn't look at it. The woman on the bench glanced at Sophie with the particular expression that old people sometimes get when a child says the thing no one else will. A look somewhere between gratitude and sorrow. Dennis turned to her. "I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is Dennis. Do you mind if I ask what's happening?" The woman folded her hands over the paper in her lap. "My name is Eleanor Marsh," she said. She had a voice that had once been fuller and was now precise in the way that voices become when they've learned to conserve themselves. "I'm 78 years old. I've been sitting here for perhaps half an hour. I was waiting for my nephew, who is running late. I have a medical condition that makes standing for long periods difficult." She looked at the officer. "I showed him my transit card and the message from my nephew. He wasn't interested." Golding shifted his weight. "Ma'am, we've had complaints from store tenants." "Which store?" Dennis said. "I'm sorry. Which store filed the complaint?" A pause. "That's not information I'm in a position to share." "So there may not have been a complaint," Dennis said. "Not an accusation, just a sentence." Goulding's jaw moved. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step back and let us." "You were going to make a 78-year-old woman stand up and walk out in the rain," Dennis said. "Because she was sitting on a bench while she waited for her nephew." He said it the way you say a thing you want the air itself to register. Not loudly. Loudly would have been easier to dismiss. The corridor had shifted. It does this without announcement. The ambient sound changes register, and a loose knot of people forms the way people form when they sense that something real is happening. A woman with shopping bags had stopped. A teenage boy with headphones around his neck was watching. An older couple near the escalator had slowed. "There's a policy," Goulding said. His voice had changed pitch in the way voices do when they know they're being observed and have begun performing competence rather than exercising it. "I'd like to see it," Dennis said. "In writing." "Sir, I'd genuinely like to see the policy that says a person with a documented medical condition can't sit on a public bench in a shopping mall while they wait for a family member." He said it still in that same even register, because if that policy exists, it's worth knowing about. Sophie, standing was very quiet. Dennis knew the difference. Eleanor Marsh looked at the paper in her hands and then placed it carefully back into her coat pocket. The second officer, the broader one, his tag read Morin, unfolded his arms. "Goulding," he said. One word, whatever that word meant, between the two of them. Goulding heard it. His posture changed the way a posture changes when a decision is being reversed, and the person reversing it is trying not to look like that's what they're doing. A woman in a charcoal blazer appeared from the direction of the main management corridor. She walked quickly, and she had the expression of someone moving to contain something before it became something else. Her name tag identified her as K. Arsenault, property manager. The officers, Dennis, Sophie, Eleanor on the bench, and arrived at the situation in approximately 4 seconds. "What's going on here?" she asked, directing it at Goulding. "Ma'am, we received a concern about." "From which tenant?" The same pause. Arsenault looked at Dennis. "Sir, I apologize for any inconvenience. If there's been a misunderstanding." "There hasn't been a misunderstanding," Dennis said. "Mrs. Marsh is 78. She has a medical condition. She's been waiting for her nephew, and your officer was going to put her out in the rain." He said it simply. He said it in front of the people who had gathered without quite meaning to. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice that was made, and I think it's worth someone being clear about that. Arsenault looked at Eleanor Marsh. At the bench. At the thin coat and the mended bag and the neat white hair. "Mrs. Marsh," she said, "you're absolutely welcome to stay." Eleanor did not thank her. Not immediately. She looked at the property manager for a moment with the measured steadiness of someone who has decided, late in life, not to perform gratitude for things that should never have been in question. Then she inclined her head, just slightly. "My nephew will be here in 15 minutes, she said. Arsenault turned to the officers. "We'll discuss this later." The sentence had weight in it. Goulding and Morin moved away, the particular retreat of people who are ending a situation rather than concluding one. The small crowd dissolved back into itself. The woman with shopping bags moved on. The teenage boy put his headphones back over his ears. Sophie tugged Dennis's sleeve. "Daddy," she said. "Is she okay?" Dennis looked down at his daughter. "Let's go ask." They sat on the bench, Eleanor at her end, Sophie at the other, Dennis in the middle. Sophie, with the logic of a 6-year-old who had decided something, scooted slightly closer to Eleanor than she'd started. "Your boots are very clean," Eleanor said to Sophie. "My dad polishes them," Sophie said. "He uses a special cloth. A good cloth makes sense too." Dennis looked at Eleanor Marsh properly for the first time. There was a precision to her, he thought. The way she held herself. The way she'd presented that piece of paper. Not as proof of worthiness but as a courtesy, an offering of information to someone who was choosing not to receive it. "Do you come here often?" he asked, and immediately felt the flatness of the phrase. Eleanor permitted a small smile. "My nephew and I have lunch at the cafe upstairs on the last Saturday of every month. We have done so for 11 years, she paused. "Since his mother passed, my sister." Dennis said nothing. "Some things don't require a response. He's a good man," Eleanor said. "He works very hard and he's never once been late." She looked at the escalators moving their quiet, continuous arc. "I told him I didn't mind waiting." "Did you? Mind?" She considered it. "I minded when the young man came, not before." A pause. "I used to teach at Carleton, 31 years, history. I know what it looks like when someone decides what a person is, before they've said a word." Sophie, who had been listening with the particular attentiveness children deploy when they sense that the conversation around them matters, said, "What did you teach about?" "All sorts of things. The history of this country, mostly. How it became what it is. How long it took. How much was still unfinished." Sophie absorbed this. "Is any of it finished now?" Eleanor looked at Sophie the way teachers look at children who have, without trying, cut directly to the thing. "Some of it," she said. "Not enough." They sat for a while. The mall moved around them, the escalators carried people up and brought other people down. Dennis thought about Sophie's question from the car that morning. She'd asked why some days felt better than others, even if nothing different happened. He hadn't known how to answer it. He still didn't, exactly. But he thought that maybe part of the answer was this. Some days you ended up in a place where you were needed, even if you hadn't gone looking. Eleanor's nephew arrived 11 minutes later. His name was Patrick, and he was out of breath and apologizing before he'd fully cleared the service corridor entrance. He was perhaps 50, wearing a parka with a hardware store logo on the breast. He stopped when he saw his aunt flanked by a man in work jeans, and a small girl eating a second hot chocolate that Dennis had gone and bought, while Eleanor and Sophie talked about whether Canada geese were brave, or just had poor judgment. "I'm so sorry, Aunt Eleanor." The car, and then the bus was. "You're here," Eleanor said. She stood with the careful arrangement of someone for whom standing from low furniture required a plan. Patrick immediately offered his arm. "This is Dennis, and this is Sophie. They kept me company." Patrick shook Dennis's hand with both of his. He had the handshake of someone who meant it. "The escalator to the cafe is just up here," Eleanor said to Dennis and then to Sophie. "The cafe has very good butter tarts." "What's a butter tart?" Sophie said. Eleanor and Patrick both looked at Dennis. "We've been working on it," Dennis said. Eleanor Marsh smiled, properly this time, and the smile had years in it. "Then you have something to look forward to," she said. Dennis and Sophie took the escalator up. Sophie stood on the step below his and held the rail with both hands the way he'd taught her, and near the top she looked back down at the main floor, at the bench with the steel frame and the wooden slats, and at Eleanor and Patrick moving toward the other elevator, his hand under her elbow, her canvas bag over his shoulder. "Daddy," Sophie said. "Yeah, we helped." Dennis put his hand on her shoulder. "We did," he said. The escalator reached the top, and they stepped off together into the warm air that smelled like coffee and baked sugar. And Sophie took his hand, and they went to find the butter tarts. The bench below was empty again. The strip of iron-on fabric on Eleanor's mended bag caught the light for just a moment as she and Patrick turned the corner. And then they were gone, and the main floor moved on, the way main floors do, full of people going somewhere, most of them not yet knowing what they'd find when they got there.